"When are you going to die already?" Igor grumbled as he slammed the door and left the bedroom. Inside, his wife lay suffering from a terrible cough that wouldn't go away. In just a year of marriage, she had gone from being a healthy young woman to a weak, skeletal figure. Their small town had only a tiny clinic with 2 doctors. One of them was a vet, who was actually more trusted than the doctor. The doctor had tried everything to help Rita. He used cough syrups, mustard plasters, plantain leaves, chamomile, and nettle. He even sent her to the steam bath regularly, but nothing made her better. Her condition just got worse. "I'm out of ideas," the doctor said with a sigh. Rita couldn't understand what was happening to her either. She had always been full of energy, but now it felt like her marriage had drained all her vitality. The villagers started gossiping. She must be cursed, they would say when they gathered at the shop or by the water pump. Rita married at 20. Igor, who was from the city, came to their village saying he wanted to bring new energy to the countryside. He got a job driving a bread delivery truck. "You should be proud of me, wife," he would boast. "Without me, there would be no bread for the whole village." Rita just nodded and didn't argue. "We even have an apartment in the city, but I'm renting it out for now," Igor would brag. "I'm saving up to buy a bigger place for us, especially if we have kids." The village women admired him and praised him as a rare and great husband. They would then go home and scold their own husbands. But Rita was happy with their little house and didn't want to move. Still, her health kept getting worse. Her cough was joined by a runny nose, and sometimes she would wake up at night unable to breathe through her nose. When this happened, she'd get up suddenly, waking Igor, who would grumble and complain. "Why are you always moving around? I need to get up early, and I can't sleep because of you," Igor complained. But as soon as his head hit the pillow, he would snore loudly, filling the room with noise. Rita would quietly get up and move to another room, where she could get some rest, though not without a headache and feeling weak in the morning. At least she could breathe a little better. Rita worked at the local library, handing out books and filling out forms. The villagers enjoyed borrowing books and showing off their new knowledge at the water pump. Even though her job wasn't physically demanding, she came home feeling exhausted. Igor, who finished his bread deliveries early, would wait for her to come home, expecting her to cook dinner and take care of him. "Why can't you peel some potatoes before I get home? It takes longer to wait for you to do it," he'd grumble. "Well, excuse me, do you think I don't deserve to rest after carrying bread all day?" He'd snap back, even though Rita knew he hardly did any of the heavy work himself. Other people handled the unloading. She was too tired to argue. By evening, her cough would worsen, her eyes would get red, and a rash would spread over her skin. "Are you sure this isn't contagious?" Igor asked one morning, noticing the red spots on her back. "I don't need more problems." He slammed the door and left without breakfast. From then on, he started working night shifts, saying the stores needed fresh bread in the mornings. In reality, he was lying to Rita and staying away for days or even weeks, leaving her to struggle alone. At night, she could barely breathe, her cough was unbearable, and Igor's constant criticism and indifference only made things worse. "Why don't you go to the city hospital?" her friend Svetlana suggested. "They have real doctors there, not just the quack we have here." "What can they do?" "I'll rest and get better," Rita replied weakly. Svetlana hesitated before saying, "I didn't want to worry you, but some people say they saw Igor with a girl from the city who was here for the harvest. But you know how gossip is." Rita gave a bitter smile. She had noticed her husband's change in behavior long ago. She'd even found lipstick stains on his shirts a few times, although lately he'd started washing them himself. "I'm taking care of you since you're so weak," he'd say, but he left the sweaters and pants for her to wash. Rita's condition continued to worsen. She had been bedridden for 2 days, unable to move. Her body racked with a violent cough, her eyes red and watery, and her skin covered in a rash. "When are you finally going to die?" Igor snapped. His new girlfriend from the rumors turned out to be real, and she was demanding more of his time, even wanting him to move to the city. But Igor couldn't leave because all his talk about having a city apartment was a lie. He didn't actually have one. He lost his previous job because of a black mark on his record. He'd been caught siphonning fuel from the truck he drove and selling it on the side. That's why he had to leave the city. Then Rita, a naive country girl, came along and even signed over half of her house. which she had inherited from her grandmother. "Come in, this is your half of the house," Igor's voice called from the hallway. "Good, solid house," an unfamiliar voice responded. "And who lives in the other half?" the stranger asked. "An old sick woman. She'll be gone soon," Igor said, with no shame in his voice. "All right, I'll take it," the stranger said. There was the sound of money rustling, a handshake, and then the door slammed. Rita, hearing them leave, tried to get up but stumbled and knocked over a chair. The stranger hurried into the room at the noise. "Still alive?" he asked, lifting Rita and helping her back onto the bed. "Where does it hurt?" "Who are you?" Rita asked, surprised enough to momentarily stop coughing. "I'm the new owner of this half of the house. And you? Who are you?" The man had expected to find an elderly woman but was surprised to see a young, though very sickly, woman. "I live here. This was my house," Rita said with a bitter smile, then started coughing again. "Hold on," the new owner said, leaving and coming back with a glass of water. "Drink it slowly." Rita, not knowing why, took the water. It helped soothe her throat and reduce the coughing. "Thank you, but this won't last." "What's your name, neighbor?" she asked as he took the empty glass. "Rita, short for Margarita," she replied. "Margarita, like the flower. A lovely name. I'm Taras." "Nice to meet you," he said, extending his hand. Rita wanted to shake it but then remembered her rash and pulled back. Taras caught her wrist before she could pull away and examined her hand closely. "How long have you had this?" he asked, frowning. "Are you a doctor or something?" Rita asked, a bit sarcastic. "Almost," Taras said seriously. "It comes and goes. It usually gets worse when I'm coughing a lot and feeling weak. It started a year ago. I've never had anything like this before." She apologized. "I need to lie down. My head is spinning." She rested her head on the pillow. "And where did you come from?" "I haven't seen you around before," she asked, studying Taras. "I'm not from here. I came from the city," he said. "Do you want the truth, or?" He smirked. "All right, I'll tell you the truth then. At this point, there's not much that scares me, and I've got nothing left to lose. I'm of no use to anyone anymore, and no one cares if I live or die. I might not be around much longer anyway." The doctor didn't check a patient's allergy to a medication he prescribed, and the patient went into anaphylactic shock and died. The family wanted justice, and I was supposed to be imprisoned. But then my wife died during childbirth, leaving me with a young son. I couldn't handle the court stress and take care of him at the same time, so I took the blame. We were already separated, so we split the apartment. I invested my share, but inflation wiped out most of it. I only had enough left to buy a room in a communal apartment. When I saw the ad for half of a house for sale in the village, I thought it was my lucky break. The seller said the other half might be available soon, and that an old sick woman lived there who would probably die soon, so I could get it cheap. But now, seeing things as they really are... Rita listened with tears streaming down her face. She never expected such betrayal from her husband. "And where is he now?" she asked quietly. "He went to the city with his fiancée. Left his phone with me, told me to call if, well, you know," Taras replied. "I see," Rita said with a bitter smile. Taras turned out to be a great neighbor. He helped her around the house and even got a job at the local hospital, replacing the old doctor who had left. One day, Taras suggested, "Marga, why don't you come to my office? I have a few ideas about your illness. Have you noticed you're coughing less and your complexion is better?" Rita had noticed but was afraid to believe it, thinking it might just be her imagination. Eventually, Taras practically insisted she come to the city with him to see a specialist. After a thorough examination, they discovered she had a rare allergy to her own husband, specifically to his biological material. If she had stayed with him much longer, she could have gone into anaphylactic shock. "Your whole body was reacting against the marriage," the specialist explained. "I didn't know anything like that was even possible," Rita said, shaking her head in disbelief. "Thank you. If it weren't for you, I might still be suffering or even worse." Life without Igor restored Rita's health and happiness. She even began to forget she had ever been married to him. Taras was always there for her, and one evening during dinner, he slid a small box across the table. Rita opened it and, shocked, looked up at him. "It's a ring," Taras said with a smile. "Yes, it's a ring," he chuckled. "But I'm still married," Rita said with a shrug. That's fixable, Tara's replied. You don't have any children, so the divorce will be quick and easy. You just need to handle the paperwork. Rita followed his advice. She had no idea where her ex-husband was, so after 2 court sessions where he didn't show up, the divorce was finalized automatically. Not long after, Rita and Tara submitted their marriage application, and a month later, they were married. I'm so glad I'm not allergic to you, Rita said with a smile, snuggling up to Tara's. A few months later, someone knocked on their door. Tara's opened it to find Igor standing there, looking disheveled, unshaven, wearing a worn-out jacket and reeking of alcohol. Well, Taras, Igor said, his breath heavy with booze. So is she dead yet? By my calculations, she should have been gone by now. You should have called me so I could finish the paperwork for the other half of the house and sell it. I've been waiting. Have you forgotten? Or have you changed your mind? I've changed my mind, Taras said, hoping Rita wouldn't come out and see him, but she did. Darling, who's there? Rita called, stepping out. When she saw Igor, she recoiled in surprise. Margit, you're alive. Igor stammered, stunned to see her healthy and pregnant. How is this possible? She's my wife, he stuttered. No, Igor, she's my wife now, and if I see you near her again, no one will ever find you. I've got nothing to lose, Taras said quietly but firmly. I'll make sure you disappear so completely that no one will ever find a trace of you. Understand? Igor, frightened, backed away quickly. Would you really have buried him? Rita asked, peeking from the room and hugging Taras tightly. If you enjoyed this story, please give it a thumbs up, and to make sure you don't miss any more stories, hit the bell when you subscribe. Wishing you all the best.
I still remember the day my world turned upside down. I was working late at my restaurant, overseeing the kitchen staff and poring over financial statements, when a chance encounter breathed life into my dreary routine. Mark sauntered into the coffee shop, his eyes searching the room before they locked onto mine. I was taking a rare break, sipping a macchiato at a corner table. I knew I looked frazzled and worn, but he saw past that. "Is this seat taken?" he asked, his voice imbued with a charming timbre. His eyes sparkled with mischief and sincerity, an intriguing blend that caught me off guard. "It is now," I replied, smiling. My curiosity piqued. Little did I know how that smile would lead me down a path filled with love, betrayal, and triumph. We talked for hours that day. Mark was an open book, sharing stories about his childhood, his dreams, his career in finance, and his close-knit family. He spoke of them with a reverence that fascinated me, yet something in his eyes hinted at a shadow I couldn't quite discern. I, too, opened up, sharing my passion for cooking, my dreams of running a successful restaurant, and my childhood struggles. I glossed over my ownership of the restaurant, not wanting to taint our connection with the stain of wealth. As days turned into weeks, our relationship blossomed. Our dates were filled with laughter, intelligent conversation, and a sense of belonging I hadn't felt in years. Mark's gentleness and attention made me feel special and valued. But there was one topic we avoided: his family. Though Mark spoke highly of them, a subtle tension always crept into his voice. He would change the subject or become vague when pressed. My own family was simple, just me and my mother. My father had left us when I was young, and we struggled to make ends meet. My mother's sacrifices allowed me to pursue my culinary dreams, and owning a restaurant was both my passion and my tribute to her. As my love for Mark grew, so did a nagging suspicion that something was amiss. His family remained a mystery, hidden behind veils of politeness and evasion. The day Mark invited me to dinner with his family, I felt both excitement and trepidation. Little did I know that the stage was set for a confrontation that would shake the very core of my being. In those blissful early days, all I saw was a loving man and the promise of a bright future. I didn't see the storm clouds gathering on the horizon, the brewing tempest that would test my strength, my dignity, and my very sense of self. But storms are often hidden by beautiful skies, and it was under such a sky that Mark and I began our ill-fated dance. a dance that would lead me through a world of arrogance, humiliation, and finally, to a revelation that would define my life. The seeds of that revelation were sown in our first meeting, in that sparkling glance, in that innocent smile. The journey had begun, and there was no turning back. The day finally arrived, a day filled with anticipation and anxiety. Mark had been hesitant to introduce me to his family, but after much coaxing, he had relented. The Richards were gathering for their monthly family dinner, and I was to be the guest of honor. I spent the day preparing myself, choosing the right outfit, practicing my best smile, and arming myself with politeness. In the back of my mind, though, lurked an uneasy feeling, a whisper that something was not quite right. The Richards' residence was nothing short of grand, an opulent mansion that reeked of old money and power. As Mark led me to the door, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was stepping into a lion's den. "Remember, they'll love you just as I do," Mark reassured me, his voice tinged with a hint of doubt. We were greeted by Lady Margaret, Mark's mother, a regal woman with piercing eyes that seemed to size me up in an instant. Her smile was polite but cold, her handshake firm but devoid of warmth. "Sandra, dear, how wonderful to meet you," she said, her words dripping with a sweetness that didn't quite reach her eyes. The dinner began with formal introductions. Mark's sisters, Janice and Denise, were as polished and poised as their mother, their gazes equally scrutinous. The rest of the family was a mirror image of privilege and pretense. We settled into the lavishly decorated dining room, and the conversation turned to casual topics. The weather, the city's latest news, and Mark's achievements. I was largely overlooked, a shadow at the feast. The meal was a culinary masterpiece, yet I found myself struggling to enjoy it. The family's conversation was laced with subtle jabs at those less fortunate, veiled criticisms that I couldn't help but take personally. "So, Sandra," Lady Margaret finally turned to me, her voice silky and calculating. "Mark tells us you're from a single-parent family. How quaint! It must have been quite challenging." I forced a smile, biting back my indignation. "Yes, it was a journey, but one that taught me the value of hard work and perseverance." "How charming," she replied, her eyes glinting with something I couldn't quite place. "And what do you do for a living?" "I manage a restaurant," I replied, careful to omit my ownership. "A manager? How very industrious," Janice chimed in, her words a thinly veiled mockery. The dinner wore on, each course a new opportunity for subtle humiliation. They spoke of wealth, status, and connections, a world I was clearly not a part of. Mark was silent, his eyes downcast, a passive observer to my slow degradation. I played the gracious guest, biting my tongue and smiling through the insults, feeling a growing resentment toward Mark for his indifference. As the night wore on, I realized that I had been not a guest, but a curiosity, a spectacle to be observed and judged. I had been weighed and found wanting, a poor girl from a single-parent family who had dared to dream of a place at their table. The ride home was quiet, the air thick with unspoken thoughts. Mark's family had shown their true colors, and I was left to ponder my place in this twisted dance. I had seen the face of arrogance and haughtiness, and it had left a bitter taste in my mouth. Yet something told me that this was just the beginning, the opening act of a drama that would test my very soul. In the quiet of the night, I knew that a storm was coming, a storm that would sweep me into a world of pain and discovery. A storm that would reveal the true nature of the man I loved and the family that held him captive. The seeds of doubt had been sown, and I was left to wonder if love could truly conquer all, or if it would crumble under the weight of greed, pride, and betrayal. Only time would tell. The weeks that followed that first dinner with the Richards were a labyrinth of contradictions. Mark's love was as ardent as ever, yet something had shifted in the landscape of our relationship. His family's disdain had etched a fissure into our once unbreakable bond. I found myself invited to family gatherings with increasing frequency, each event a new stage, for the Richards' subtle humiliations. They seemed to take pleasure in probing my past, picking at my insecurities, and reminding me of my humble origins. There was the charity gala where Lady Margaret deliberately introduced me as Mark's little friend from the other side of town. Her friend's laughter still echoes in my ears. Then came the Sunday brunch, where Janice and Denise ridiculed the dress I'd chosen, their words dripping with folks' admiration. It's amazing what they can do with cheap fabric these days. Janice had cooed, her eyes glinting with malice. Mark remained silent throughout, his eyes betraying a helplessness I couldn't comprehend. How could he allow them to treat me this way? How could he not see the cruelty hidden behind their polished smiles? I tried to talk to him about it, to unravel the mystery of his indifference, but he would only brush it off, assuring me that they would come to love me in time. But time was not a healer in this case. Time was a chisel, slowly carving away at my self-respect, at my love for Mark, at my very sense of identity. I began to doubt myself, to question my worthiness of Mark's love, to see myself through the Richards' haughty eyes. I became a stranger to myself, lost in a world that seemed determined to break me. Despite it all, I clung to my relationship with Mark. Our private moments were still filled with love and connection, but they were now tainted with the shadow of his family's arrogance. I also found solace in my restaurant, my secret sanctuary where I could be myself, where I could create and thrive without judgment. It was a world apart from the Richards' twisted games, a world where I was respected and valued. But even in that haven, I couldn't escape the creeping feeling that I was living a lie, that I was allowing myself to be treated as less than I was. I knew that something had to change, that I had to find the strength to confront the storm that was brewing. I began to see Mark's family for what they were: greedy, arrogant, and hypocritical. They were masters of manipulation, experts in the art of deception, wolves in sheep's clothing. And Mark, my dear Mark, was their puppet, a weak, spineless man who dared not go against their will. As the days turned into weeks, the pattern of disdain became a relentless cycle, a never-ending dance of humiliation and betrayal. I knew that I was nearing my breaking point, that the time had come to take control of my destiny. I began to plan, to prepare for the confrontation that was inevitable. I knew that it would not be easy, that it would require all my strength, my courage, and my self-respect. But I was ready to face the storm, ready to reclaim my life, ready to become the woman I was meant to be. The stage was set, the players were in place, and the final act was about to begin. In my heart, I knew that the time had come to stand up for myself, to break free from the chains of the Richards' arrogance, to find my voice and my dignity. The battle had begun, and I was ready to fight. For myself, for my love, for my very soul. It was time to face the storm. It was time to rise. The invitation arrived on a crisp autumn morning, a delicately penned calligraphy announcing a family party at a renowned restaurant in town. Mark's eyes danced with excitement as he handed it to me, blissfully unaware of the storm that was about to be unleashed. I smiled, a smile that hid a torrent of emotion, as I realized that fate had dealt me an incredible hand. The restaurant they had chosen for their grand family gathering was none other than mine. It was the opportunity I had been waiting for, a chance to seize control of the narrative, to turn the tables on the Richards, to show them that I was not to be trifled with. I accepted the invitation with feigned enthusiasm, my mind already whirring with plans and possibilities. The days leading up to the event were a whirlwind of preparation, both mentally and physically. I briefed my staff, ensuring that they understood the importance of the evening and the role they would play in my carefully crafted scheme. I also spent hours in front of the mirror, practicing my words, my expressions, my resolve. I knew that this would be a battle of wills, and I was determined to be the victor. Mark was blissfully ignorant, his thoughts consumed with the happiness of the occasion, the joy of bringing together the two worlds he loved. I played along, my love for him, a confusing mix of anger, disappointment, and longing. I knew that he was a victim of his family's manipulation, yet I couldn't shake the feeling that he had failed me in some fundamental way. The night of the gathering arrived, a night filled with expectation and uncertainty. I dressed with meticulous care, choosing an elegant gown that spoke of grace and confidence. As Mark and I made our way to the restaurant, I could feel the storm building within me, a tempest of emotion that threatened to overwhelm me. The restaurant was a vision of sophistication and elegance, a perfect setting for the drama that was about to unfold. The Richards were already there, their faces aglow with smug satisfaction, their eyes scanning the room with an air of ownership. They greeted us with their usual arrogance, their words a thin veneer of politeness that did little to hide their contempt. Dinner was served, and the conversation flowed with practiced ease, a symphony of insincerity and pretense. I played my part, smiling and nodding, biding my time, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. As the meal progressed, the Richards became bolder, their comments more cutting, their laughter more mocking. I could feel the storm within me growing, the thunder of my anger, the lightning of my resolve. I watched as they tore into me, their words a barrage of insults and insinuations, their eyes gleaming with malice. And then it happened. Lady Margaret, her face flushed with wine and arrogance, turned me with a sneer, her voice dripping with condescension. "Sandra, my dear, I must say that you are completely unworthy of my son. You're nothing but a poor girl from a single-parent family, and I simply cannot allow my son to degrade himself by marrying you. Mark, break it off. This farce has gone on long enough." The room went still, the air thick with shock and disbelief. Mark's face went white, his eyes wide with horror, his voice a strangled whisper. "Mother, what are you saying?" I looked at him, my heart aching for his pain, yet knowing that this was the moment I had been waiting for. I stood, my body trembling with righteous anger, my voice clear and strong. "Lady Margaret, I thank you for your honesty, but I must correct you on one thing. You see, this is not just any restaurant. This is my restaurant. This is my restaurant, and I will not sit at the same table with people who think so little of me." I turned to my staff, who were standing by, ready to act. "Please escort these people out. They are no longer welcome here." The Richards were stunned, their faces pale with shock, their mouths agape. I watched as they were led out, their arrogance replaced with humiliation, their power stripped away. I turned to Mark, his face a mask of confusion and pain. "I'm sorry, Mark," I said, my voice gentle but firm. "But I cannot marry a man who allows his family to treat me this way." I walked out, leaving him behind, my heart heavy with grief, but my soul ablaze with triumph. The storm had been unleashed, and I had emerged victorious. But at what cost? The night was dark and somber as I made my way home, the streets echoing with the silence of my solitude. The events of the evening were a whirlwind in my mind, a chaos of emotion and revelation. I had done it. I had stood up to the Richards, faced them down, reclaimed my dignity. I had shown them that I was not a pawn in their twisted game, that I was a woman of strength and self-respect. Yet the victory was bittersweet, tinged with the pain of losing Mark, the man I had once believed to be the love of my life. I knew that I had done the right thing, that I had chosen myself over a relationship that was toxic and demeaning. But the loss was real, the void in my heart a gaping wound. I spent the night in restless contemplation, replaying the evening's events, wrestling with my feelings of triumph and loss. I knew that the storm was not over, that the Richards would not go quietly into the night. They were people of influence and power, people who would not take kindly to being humiliated. But I was ready for whatever came next, armed with the knowledge that I was strong, that I was worthy, that I had faced my demons and emerged victorious. The morning brought with it a new sense of clarity, a determination to move forward, to rebuild my life without the shadow of the Richards. I threw myself into my work, finding solace in the familiar rhythm of the restaurant, the the camaraderie of my staff, the joy of creating something beautiful and nourishing. Days turned into weeks, and the world continued to spin, the storm of that night slowly receding into memory. But the Richards were not done with me. One bright and chilly morning, a knock on my door broke the tranquility of my solitude. I opened it to find Mark's mother, Lady Margaret, standing on my doorstep, her face a mask of contrition, her eyes pleading. "Sandra," she began, her voice trembling, "we've come to apologize." I looked past her to see Mark, his face pale and drawn, his eyes filled with a mix of hope and despair. I felt a pang of sympathy, a longing to comfort him, to forgive him. But I knew that I could not, that I must not. I listened as Lady Margaret spoke, her words a carefully crafted dance of apology and manipulation. "We were wrong, Sandra. We see that now. We want to make amends, to welcome you into our family." Her eyes flicked to Mark, a subtle signal that I did not miss. I looked at him, seeing the boy I had once loved, the man I had once believed in. But I also saw the weakness, the lack of resolve, the inability to stand up for what was right. I knew then that I could never go back, that the bridge had been burned, that the love we had once shared was now a ghost of the past. I reached into my purse, pulling out a wad of bills, my eyes never leaving Lady Margaret's. "Here," I said, my voice cold and firm. "Take this and stay out of my sight." I watched as she picked up the money, her face a mask of shock and disbelief. I closed the door, my heart heavy with the finality of the moment. I knew that I had done the right thing, that I had chosen myself over a relationship that was never meant to be. But the pain was real, the loss profound. I had weathered the storm, emerged stronger and wiser, but I was changed, scarred by the battle, forever altered by the choices I had made. I looked out the window, watching as the Richards drove away, a chapter of my life closing, a new one beginning. I knew that I was ready for whatever came next, armed with the strength of my convictions, the knowledge of my worth, the courage of my choices. I was free, unburdened by the weight of the past, ready to face the future with a heart full of hope and a soul full of fire. The storm had passed, and I was reborn.
Once upon a time, in a quaint American town, I lived a life that was nearly perfect, or so I believed. My name is Karen, and I want to tell you about the family I thought I knew. We were the very picture of the American dream. A modest house with a white picket fence, windows adorned with colorful curtains, and a yard where laughter filled the air. A place where Sunday morning pancakes were a ritual, and bedtime stories were a promise never broken. My husband Martin was the sort of man you could rely on. Steady, affectionate, with a humor that made everyday life sparkle. Our son, Tommy, was a 9-year-old bundle of joy, his laughter like music, his curiosity endless. He'd run through the house with a toy airplane, dreaming of adventures, while our dog, Buddy, would chase him, barking merrily. Then there was Agnes, Martin's mother, a constant presence, often visiting us with homemade cookies and tales of the old days. Her eyes would twinkle as she'd play with Tommy, teaching him card tricks or reading him stories of knights and dragons. Our home was a symphony of love, trust, and simple pleasures. Dinners were loud, filled with talk about our days, plans for vacations, or Tommy's latest achievements at school. We'd celebrate birthdays with homemade cakes and laughter, the candles reflecting the glow in our eyes. But as the seasons changed, so did life in ways I could never have predicted. Our happiness was genuine, but it was built on a foundation that was about to crack. Life is good, isn't it, Karen? Martin said one spring evening, his voice carrying that familiar comfort. It's perfect, I answered, not noticing the shadow in his eyes or the hidden tremor in his voice. That was the calm before the storm, the last breath of normality before our world would turn upside down. The perfect family was an illusion, a beautiful picture soon to be shattered by a truth that was lurking, unseen, in the very heart of our home. But at that moment, as the sun set and the fragrance of blooming flowers filled the air, everything seemed flawless. I held my family close, unaware that the seeds of betrayal had already been sown, and a storm was brewing on the horizon. In retrospect, I realized that perfection is fragile and appearances can be deceiving. But back then, in the sanctuary of our family, I was blissfully ignorant of the trials that awaited us. Little did I know, the real story was about to begin. Life has a curious way of reminding us of its unpredictable nature, of teaching us lessons when we least expect them. The second chapter of our story opened with an unforeseen tragedy that hit like a bolt from the blue. My mother, a gentle soul with a heart as big as the sky, had always been the anchor of our family. Her wisdom, her laughter, and her unwavering support were my pillars. Her disease was cruel, rare, and relentless, striking without warning and consuming her in a matter of months. I remember the call from the doctor, his voice hesitant and heavy with regret. "Karen," he began, "I'm afraid your mother's condition is more serious than we thought." The room spun around me, and I clung to the back of a chair, my mind refusing to accept what I was hearing. "A rare disease," he said. "No cure," he said. "A matter of time," he said. "No, not my mother. Not now." But life was not listening to my pleas. It continued its relentless march, leaving me and my family in a storm of disbelief and sorrow. Tommy would often ask, "When is Grandma coming home, Mommy?" His innocent eyes searched mine for reassurance, a reassurance I couldn't give. "Grandma's very sick, sweetheart," I'd say, choking back tears. "But she loves you very much." Martin and Agnes were supportive, holding me as I cried, trying to keep a sense of normality for Tommy's sake. But a shadow had fallen over our home, a chill that no amount of warmth could dispel. The days turned into weeks, and my mother's condition worsened. Visiting her in the hospital became a routine, a painful ritual filled with hope and despair. Her once vibrant eyes dimmed, her laughter replaced by a painful silence. Yet, even in her weakest moments, my mother's spirit remained unbroken. "Take care of Tommy," she'd whisper, squeezing my hand. "He's a special boy, Karen." "I will, Mom. I'd promise," my voice breaking. "I'll make you proud." Her smile was my solace, a glimmer of light in the dark. And then, one cold winter morning, she was gone. The call came, and I knew before I even picked up the phone. My mother had left us, her battle over, her pain at an end. The funeral was a blur of tears, eulogies, and hugs from friends and family. We said our goodbyes, each of us carrying a piece of her in our hearts. In her will, she left Tommy a generous inheritance, $300,000, a testament to her love and foresight. I decided to place the money in a safe, a sacred trust for Tommy's future. But what I didn't know was that the money would become the catalyst for a series of events that would tear apart the very fabric of our family. The storm was coming, and the cracks in our perfect life were beginning to show. As the last guests left the funeral, I stood by my mother's grave, a sense of foreboding settling over me. Our story was far from over, and the real struggle was only just beginning. Spring arrived with a hint of renewal, but the warmth of the season couldn't thaw the chill that had settled over our family since my mother's passing. The echoes of her laughter still lingered in the corners of our home, and Tommy's questions about his grandma were a constant, painful reminder of what we'd lost. The money she left Tommy, that significant sum of $300,000, was more than just an inheritance. It was a symbol of her love, a promise for his future, and I was determined to keep it safe until he was old enough to make wise decisions. But as the weeks went by, I began to notice subtle changes in Martin and Agnes. Whispers behind closed doors, sidelong glances, a growing interest in the inheritance that I couldn't quite understand. "Karen, darling," Martin began one evening, his voice cautious. "Have you thought about what we should do with Tommy's money? Maybe investing it would be a good idea." I looked up from the dishes, surprised by the suggestion. Investing? I thought we agreed to keep it safe for Tommy. Martin's eyes flickered, and he exchanged a quick glance with Agnes. "Yes, but maybe we could make it grow, for his college or something." I felt a twinge of unease. "I don't know, Martin. That's Tommy's money. We should leave it as it is." Agnes chimed in, her voice sweet but insistent. "But think of the possibilities, Karen. We could turn that money into so much more." The conversation left me unsettled, a nagging suspicion growing in my mind. Why were they so interested in Tommy's inheritance? Why now? As the days turned into weeks, the tension in our home grew. Martin and Agnes's interest in the money became more apparent. Their suggestions more insistent. They talked about investments, business opportunities, a chance to make the most of what Tommy had been left. But their words rang hollow, their smiles forced, and I found myself doubting their intentions. I felt a growing distance between Martin and me, a barrier that hadn't been there before. Tommy, sensitive as he was, sensed the change too. "Mommy, why is Daddy so grumpy?" He'd ask, his eyes wide with concern. "He's just worried about things, sweetheart," I'd reply, my heart aching for the simplicity we had lost. The once harmonious melody of our family was discordant now, filled with unspoken words and hidden agendas. I found myself watching Martin, questioning him in a way I never had before. Was this the man I married? Was this the father of my child? Arguments became more frequent, our conversations laced with bitterness and suspicion. I found myself locking the safe, something I never thought I'd do. Trust was eroding, and with it, the foundation of our family was crumbling. The perfect picture we had painted was cracking, the vibrant colors fading into shades of doubt and fear. The storm was gathering strength, and I could feel it in my bones. But the worst was yet to come. The betrayal, the deceit, and the unraveling of everything I thought I knew were waiting just around the corner. I wish I could say I saw it coming. I wish I could say I was prepared. But nothing could have prepared me for what happened next. The innocence of childhood has a way of seeing through the veils adults create. It was a summer morning when the truth that had been lurking in the shadows finally came into the light, exposed by the unassuming eyes of my 9-year-old son. Tommy had always been fascinated by technology, and one of his treasured possessions was a small video camera he'd received for his birthday. He'd film his toys, our dog Buddy, and sometimes our family during dinner or playtime. I'd never thought much of it until the day he stumbled upon a truth that would shatter our lives. "Mommy, look what I made!" Tommy exclaimed, running into the kitchen, his eyes bright with excitement. I turned from the stove, smiling at his enthusiasm. "What is it, sweetheart?" He handed me his camera, his little chest puffing with pride. "I made a movie." Curious, I played the video, expecting to see one of his usual creations. But what I saw made my heart stop in my chest and my blood turned to ice. The footage was shaky, taken from behind a slightly ajar door. There on the small screen was our family safe, the one that held Tommy's inheritance. And there, in chilling clarity, was Martin working the combination with a focused expression, Agnes watching over his shoulder. My mind refused to accept what I was seeing. It couldn't be. Not Martin. "What's Daddy doing, Mommy?" Tommy asked, his voice filled with confusion. I looked into his innocent eyes, and something inside me broke. The betrayal was real. The deceit laid bare. My husband and his mother had been plotting behind my back, their greed unveiled by the very child they'd betrayed. My hands were shaking as I replayed the video, the image of Martin's face, his cold determination etching itself into my mind. The pieces of the puzzle fell into place, the whispers, the glances, the growing tension. With a clarity that was both enlightening and devastating, I understood what had been happening. They wanted the money. They were willing to steal from their own flesh and blood. I hugged Tommy close, my tears falling onto his hair, my body racked with sobs. "It's okay, Mommy," he whispered, his little arms wrapped around me. "Don't cry." But how could I not cry? The world I thought I knew had been ripped apart. The trust I'd placed in Martin and Agnes shattered into a million pieces. That night, after Tommy was in bed, I confronted Martin, the video playing in the background, a damning testament to his betrayal. "How could you?" I screamed, my voice filled with rage and disbelief. "How could you do this to us? To Tommy?" Martin's face went pale, his eyes wide with shock and guilt. Agnes stood behind him, her face a mask of feigned innocence. "It's not what it looks like, Karen," Martin stammered, his voice trembling. "Don't lie to me," I yelled, my whole body shaking. "You were going to steal from our son." The room was filled with tension, accusations, and tears. The words were a blur, the explanations hollow, the apologies meaningless. The man I thought I knew was a stranger, his love a lie, his promises broken. Agnes, the grandmother who had played with Tommy, who had baked cookies and read stories, was a part of the deceit, her kindness a facade. The storm had hit, and our family was torn apart. There was no going back, no repairing what had been broken. The greed that had been lurking in the shadows had been unveiled, and with it, the very soul of our family had been laid bare. That night, as I lay in bed, the house filled with an eerie silence. I knew that our story had taken a dark and irrevocable turn. The battle had begun, and I was ready to fight, for Tommy, for my mother's memory, and for the truth. There would be no forgiveness, no understanding, no second chances. The lines were drawn, and I knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that I was on my own. The dawn of the next day arrived, but its light could not penetrate the heavy gloom that had settled over our home. The walls that had once resonated with warmth and joy now seemed to close in, suffocating and lifeless. I spent the morning in a state of numb disbelief, replaying the events of the previous night, Martin's guilty face, Agnes's cold eyes. The betrayal cut deep, a wound that would not heal. I knew I had to act, to protect Tommy's future and to ensure that justice was done. But the path ahead was fraught with uncertainty, and the fight would not be easy. How do you battle those you once loved? How do you find the strength to confront those who had been your family? The answer lay in Tommy's trusting eyes, his innocence, his belief in me. He was the reason for everything, the heart of my determination. I would fight for him, no matter the cost. I started by consulting a lawyer, explaining the situation and showing him the video evidence. He was shocked by the brazenness of Martin and Agnes's actions, but confident that the evidence was strong. "Karen, we have a solid case here," he assured me. "This video is damning. But this won't be easy. Are you prepared for what's to come?" I looked him in the eyes, my resolve unwavering. I'll do whatever it takes to protect my son. Over the following weeks, the legal process unfolded, a slow and agonizing journey through a system that seemed indifferent to the pain and betrayal I felt. Papers were filed, statements taken, lawyers consulted. Martin and Agnes, their true natures exposed, were unrepentant, defiant even. They hired their own attorneys, and the battle lines were drawn. Through it all, I clung to Tommy, our bond strengthening in the face of adversity. He was my rock, my reason to keep fighting, even when the days were darkest. "Mommy, will everything be okay?" he would ask, his little face filled with worry. I would hug him close, my voice firm but gentle. "Everything will be okay, sweetheart. I promise." The court hearings loomed, a daunting prospect that filled me with both determination and dread. Friends and family rallied around us, their support a lifeline in a sea of turmoil. But the battle was taking its toll. The strain was evident in Tommy's behavior, his once carefree spirit replaced by anxiety and confusion. I found myself looking over my shoulder, mistrust and suspicion clouding my every interaction. Our home, once filled with love, was now a battleground. Each room a reminder of the deceit and greed that had torn us apart. As the court date approached, I found myself reflecting on everything that had led us to this point. The happy memories were tainted, the love I'd felt for Martin replaced by anger and disgust. I knew that the road ahead would be long and painful, that the scars would never truly heal. But I also knew that I had the strength to face it, to fight for my son's future, to reclaim our lives. There was no turning back, no room for doubt. The battle had begun, and I was ready. For Tommy, for justice, for myself. I was a mother, and I would not be defeated. The courtroom was a sterile, imposing place, filled with dark wood and solemn faces. It was a world away from the warmth of home, a stark reminder of how far we'd come. The trial began with a bang, the opening statements setting the tone for what would be a tense and grueling process. Our client, Karen, is a victim of betrayal by those closest to her. A mother who sought only to protect her son's future, now forced to fight for justice. My lawyer began, his voice filled with conviction. "Objection," Martin's lawyer interjected. "We have yet to see concrete evidence of these so-called betrayals." The judge waved him down. "Continue." Martin was a shell of the man I'd once known. His eyes hollow, his face drawn. Agnes, for her part, seemed almost defiant, her posture rigid, her gaze unyielding. I took the stand, my voice trembling but clear. I trusted them. I loved them. And they betrayed me. They stole from my son, from his future. Martin's lawyer was relentless, probing and prodding, trying to find a crack in my armor. "Isn't it true, Mrs. Johnson, that you were aware of your husband's financial difficulties, that this entire situation could have been a misunderstanding?" "No," I shot back, anger rising. "There's no misunderstanding in theft, in betrayal." The video was played, the images stark and unyielding. Tommy's innocence captured on film, the shocking reality laid bare for all to see. The days turned into weeks, the strain taking its toll on all of us. Tommy's anxiety grew, his nights filled with nightmares, his days shadowed by fear. "Will Daddy go to jail, Mommy?" he asked one night, his voice small and scared. I hugged him close, my heart breaking. "I know, sweetheart, but I'm here for you, always." The trial seemed to drag on forever. Each day a battle, each testimony a skirmish. The lawyers clashed, the judge presided, and we all waited, the future hanging in the balance. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the closing arguments were made, the case presented to the jury. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, we have seen the evidence. We have heard the testimonies. This is a case of greed, of betrayal, of a mother's love pitted against a husband's treachery. My lawyer concluded, his voice ringing with conviction. The jury was sent away. The waiting began. Hours turned into days, the tension building, the outcome uncertain. I spent the time with Tommy trying to distract him, to bring some normalcy back to our lives. But the shadow of the trial loomed large, its verdict a sword hanging over our heads. Finally, the call came. The verdict was in. I sat in the courtroom, my hands clenched, my breath shallow. The jury filed in, their faces inscrutable, their decision sealed. The judge turned to them, his voice solemn. Has the jury reached a verdict? We have, Your Honor. The room was silent, the air thick with anticipation. The moment had come, the truth about to be revealed. The judge turned to the jury foreperson. What say you? We find the defendants, Martin Johnson and Agnes Johnson, guilty as charged. The words echoed in the room, a shockwave of realization, relief, and vindication. Justice had been served. The battle was won. The verdict marked the end of a chapter, but the beginning of a new journey. The justice system had done its part. The responsibility now lay with me to rebuild our lives. Tommy's relief was palpable, his smile returning, his spirit brightening. But the shadows of the past lingered, the scars a reminder of the battle we'd fought. The days following the trial were filled with legal formalities, the compensation to be arranged, the divorce proceedings to be initiated. Martin's 1-year jail sentence was a hollow victory, the punishment seeming inadequate for the betrayal. Agnes, too, seemed untouched, her wealth protecting her, her arrogance undiminished. But I was not deterred. The fight had changed me, hardened me. I was no longer the naive wife, the trusting daughter-in-law. I was a warrior, a mother, a survivor. The divorce was a formality, the papers signed with a sense of finality, the marriage a distant memory. The compensation, however, proved to be a battle. Agnes's lawyers fighting tooth and nail, dragging the process out, turning it into a war of attrition. But I was prepared, my resolve unshaken. I had fought for justice. I would fight for what was rightfully Tommy's. The months dragged on, the legal battle a constant reminder of the treachery, the greed, the pain. But through it all, Tommy and I grew closer, our bond strengthening, our love deepening. We found joy in simple things, laughter in unexpected places, hope in each other. Friends and family rallied around us, their support a lifeline, their love a balm. Slowly, we began to heal, to move forward, to rebuild. The house, once a battleground, became a sanctuary, a place of love and warmth. Tommy thrived, his resilience a testament to his strength, his innocence a beacon of hope. And I found myself again, the woman I'd been before the trail, but stronger, wiser, more determined. Finally, after a long and arduous battle, the compensation was secured, Agnes's wealth unable to shield her from justice. The money was placed in a trust for Tommy, his future secure, his inheritance protected. We celebrated not for the victory, but for the freedom, the end of a chapter, the beginning of a new life.